There was something I was told most people ignore because it feels too simple to matter. Not a long prayer, not a complicated ritual, not something that takes time, just a few words. I remember this clearly. Out of everything people focused on, this was the one moment almost everyone skipped, not intentionally, but automatically, right before they ate. Now listen carefully. Have you ever noticed how quickly you move into eating? You sit down, you grab your food, you start immediately, no pause, no awareness, no transition. It's automatic. And that's exactly why this moment matters more than people realize. Now imagine this. You go through your entire day reacting to everything, moving quickly, thinking constantly, never stopping. And then you eat in the same state, distracted, unfocused, unaware. That moment becomes just another automatic action. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. Moments like this are not small, they are entry points. Because whatever state you are in, when you do something repeatedly, that state gets reinforced. I saw this again and again. People were not just shaped by big decisions, but by small, repeated moments of no awareness. And eating was one of the biggest ones. Now listen carefully. This is not about superstition. It's not about saying magic words. It's about something deeper, interrupting the automatic pattern. Now imagine this right before you eat. Instead of rushing, you pause, even for a few seconds. You become aware. You reset your focus. That moment changes your state. Now, here's where most people misunderstand. They think words alone do something, but words only matter when they shift your attention. And there are seven simple words that, when used correctly, create that shift instantly, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they make you do. Pause, focus, reset. And in this message, I'm going to show you what those words are, why this moment matters more than you think, and how something this small can change how you move through your entire day. Now, this is the part most people overlook because it feels ordinary. I remember this clearly. People focused on big habits, morning routines, long prayers, major changes, but they ignored the small transitions. And one of the most powerful transitions happens right before you eat. Now, listen carefully. Eating is not just physical, it's a state. And whatever state you bring into that moment, you reinforce it. Now imagine this. You've been distracted all day. Your mind is moving fast. You're thinking about multiple things. You sit down to eat and you continue in that same state. What happens? Nothing resets because you carried the same pattern forward. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. If you don't pause, you don't break the pattern. I saw this again and again. People wanted more focus, more control, more clarity, but they moved from one action to another without ever interrupting their state. And because of that, everything felt continuous. Now, listen carefully. The moment before you eat is one of the easiest places to reset your attention because it happens every day, multiple times. It's consistent. Now imagine this. Instead of rushing into your food, you stop just for a few seconds. You become aware of what you're about to do. You slow your breathing. You bring your attention back. That moment breaks the automatic flow. Now, here's something very important. This is not about the food, it's about your focus. Because when you reset your focus, everything that follows becomes more intentional. I saw this clearly. People who created small pauses like this started feeling more in control throughout their day, not because they did something big, but because they stopped moving automatically. Now listen carefully. This is the shift. You stop treating eating like just another action and start using it as a reset point. Now imagine this: every time you eat, you pause, you reset your state, you return to awareness. That repetition builds control. Now here's the truth: consistency in small moments creates stability in larger ones. And once that stability builds, you don't feel as scattered anymore. Now listen carefully. This is why this moment matters. It gives you a chance to interrupt everything and start again. Not tomorrow, not later, right now. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the 7 words themselves, what they are, and why most people say similar things but still miss the actual shift. Now, this is the part most people focus on, the words themselves. But I remember this clearly. People always asked, what exactly should I say? As if the power was hidden in the phrase, but what I saw was different. Now listen carefully. The words are simple. I pause, I focus, I am grateful. 7 words, nothing complicated, nothing mysterious. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think saying them quickly is enough. It's not. Now imagine this: you say the words fast, without thinking, without feeling, without changing your state. What happens? Nothing, because the words passed through you, but didn't affect you. Now here's the truth you need to understand. These words are not meant to be repeated, they are meant to be experienced. Each part does something specific. Now listen carefully. I pause. This interrupts the automatic pattern. It stops the rush. It creates a break between what you are doing and what you're about to do. Now imagine this. Instead of moving without thinking, you stop. That alone changes your state. Now the second part. I focus. This brings your attention back, not to everything, but to the present moment. I saw this again and again. People were always thinking ahead or thinking about something else, but never fully present. Now imagine this. You bring your attention back, right here, right now. That creates clarity. Now, the third part: I am grateful. This shifts your mindset, not in a dramatic way, but in a stabilizing way, because gratitude changes how you perceive the moment. Now imagine this: instead of being distracted or rushed, you recognize what's in front of you. That creates calm. Now here's something very important. When these 3 parts combine, pause, a focus, gratitude, they create alignment. I saw this clearly. People who used this correctly didn't just change how they ate, they changed how they moved through their day, because they were no longer automatic. Now listen carefully. This is the real purpose of these 7 words: not to add something new, but to interrupt what's already happening. Now imagine this: you use them before every meal, not quickly, but intentionally. Each time you reset your state, that repetition builds awareness. Now here's the truth: it's not about the words themselves, it's about the shift they create. And once that shift becomes consistent, everything else begins to follow. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the mistake most people make even when they use these words, why they still see no change, and what they're missing without realizing it. Now, this is where most people get stuck, because they hear the words, they try them, and then they say, it didn't do anything. I remember this clearly. People would use the exact same phrase, but the results were completely different, not because the words changed, but because their state didn't. Now listen carefully. The biggest mistake is this: they turn it into a routine. They say it quickly, they repeat it without thinking, they move on immediately, and just like that, it becomes another automatic habit. Now imagine this: you sit down to eat, you say the words in a few seconds, but your mind is still thinking about something else. You are still distracted, you are still rushed. What actually changed? Nothing, because your state never shifted. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Words only work when they change your attention. If your attention stays the same, your outcome stays the same. I saw this again and again. People thought repetition would create results, but repetition without awareness creates emptiness. Now listen carefully. Another mistake most people make is this. They separate the words from their behavior. They say, I pause, I focus, I am grateful, but then immediately they go back to rushing, back to distraction, back to automatic behavior. Now imagine this. You create a moment of awareness, but you don't carry it forward. That breaks the entire process. Because the purpose was never just to say the words, it was to change how you act next. Now here's something very important. The shift must continue after the words, not end with them. I saw this clearly. People who stayed aware for even the first few moments of eating experienced a deeper level of control, not just in that moment, but throughout the day. Now listen carefully. This is the difference. Saying the words is the beginning, not the result. Now imagine this. You say, I pause, and you actually stop. You say, I focus, and you bring your attention back. You say, I am grateful, and you feel that shift. Then you carry that state into what you do next. That's when it works. Now here's the truth. If the words don't change your behavior, they don't change your outcome. Now listen carefully. This is the real mistake. Treating it like something you say, instead of something you become in that moment. And once you see that clearly, everything becomes simple. Now imagine this. You don't rush it. You don't disconnect from it. You stay present, even after you say it. That's the difference. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what begins to happen when you apply this correctly, how your internal state starts to stabilize, and why you begin to feel more in control throughout your day. Now, this is where things begin to feel different, not dramatic, but consistent. I remember this clearly. This was the moment people stopped asking, is this really doing anything? Because they could feel it, not outside first, but inside. Now listen carefully. Before this, your state carries over from one moment to the next. You wake up distracted. You stay distracted. You feel pressure. You carry that pressure forward. Nothing interrupts it. Now imagine this. Your entire day becomes one continuous pattern. No reset, no break, no awareness. And because of that, you feel like you're always catching up. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. If you don't create reset points, your mind never stabilizes. I saw this again and again. People were not overwhelmed because of one big thing. They were overwhelmed because nothing ever stopped the flow. Now listen carefully. When you start using this moment before eating correctly, something begins to change. You introduce a pause into your day, not once, but multiple times. Now imagine this. You're moving through your day. Then you stop, you reset, you return to awareness. That moment breaks the pattern. Now here's something very important. The more you repeat this correctly, the faster your mind learns to reset. I saw this clearly. People who stayed consistent with this simple practice started recovering their focus quicker, not after hours, but in minutes. Now listen carefully. This is where your internal state begins to stabilize, because you are no longer carried by everything that happens. You interrupt it. Now imagine this. Something distracts you, but instead of staying in that state all day, you reach your next meal, you pause, you reset, and you return to clarity. That creates control. Now here's the truth. Control is not about avoiding distraction. It's about recovering quickly, and this creates that recovery. Now listen carefully. This is the shift. You are no longer stuck in one state. You are able to change it. Now imagine this. Pressure appears, but it doesn't stay with you for hours. Distraction happens, but it doesn't control your whole day because you have built a reset system. Now, here's the truth: when your state becomes easier to reset, your entire day feels lighter, more manageable, more controlled. Now, listen carefully. This is where consistency starts to build because you are no longer relying on one moment in the morning. You are reinforcing awareness throughout the day. Now imagine this. Every time you eat, you return to yourself. You become present again. That repetition creates stability. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what happens next. How this simple habit starts affecting your decisions, your reactions, and the way you move through situations without even thinking about it. Now, this is where the difference becomes visible, not just in how you feel, but in how you act. I remember this clearly. This was the point where people started noticing something unusual. They weren't reacting the same way anymore, and they didn't even realize when it started. Now, listen carefully. Up until now, you've been creating small reset points. You've been pausing, focusing, returning to awareness. And it seemed simple, almost too simple. But repetition changes everything. Now imagine this: a situation appears that would normally distract you, but this time you don't follow it, you stay present, not because you forced yourself, but because your mind is already trained to return. That's the shift. Now, here's the truth you need to understand: what you repeat with awareness becomes your default response. I saw this again and again. People who stayed consistent with this practice stopped fighting their reactions because their reactions had already changed. Now listen carefully. This is where your patterns begin to rewrite, not through effort, but through conditioning. Now imagine this: something that used to frustrate you instantly now barely affects you. Something that used to pull your attention for hours now passes quickly. Something that used to control your mood now doesn't stay. That's not coincidence. That's repetition working. Now, here's something very important. This change feels natural, not forced, not heavy, because it didn't come from pressure. It came from consistency. I saw this clearly. People would suddenly realize I handled that differently, and that awareness reinforced the change even more. Now, listen carefully. This is where your decisions start improving because you are no longer reacting instantly. You are choosing. Now imagine this: you pause before responding, you think clearly before acting, you stay steady instead of rushing. That creates better outcomes. Now, here's the truth: better decisions don't come from more thinking, they come from clearer thinking. And clear thinking comes from a stable state. Now listen carefully. This is the next shift. You are no longer trying to control your reactions. Your reactions are already controlled. Now imagine this: you move through your day with less effort, less confusion, less mental noise, more clarity, more direction, more control. That creates momentum. Now here's the truth: when your reactions and decisions improve at this level, your entire experience begins to change because you are no longer operating the same way. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the final stage: what it looks like when this becomes part of who you are, and you no longer have to think about it at all. Now, this is the stage most people never expect because they think something this small can't become something permanent. I remember this clearly. People would start this practice. They would feel the difference. they would notice more control. But they still believed it required effort, until one day it didn't. Now listen carefully. There is a point where this stops being something you remember to do and becomes something you do naturally. Now imagine this. You sit down to eat, and without forcing it, you pause, your mind settles, your attention returns. Not because you reminded yourself, but because it's already built into you. That's the shift. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Anything repeated with awareness long enough becomes automatic. I saw this again and again. People who stayed consistent with this simple moment reached a point where they didn't need to think about it anymore. It just happened. Now listen carefully. This is where your internal system becomes stable, not because life is perfect, but because your response is consistent. Now imagine this. You move through your day, and small reset points start appearing naturally, not just before eating, but in other moments too, before speaking, before reacting, before making decisions. That's when it expands. Now, here's something very important. What started as one habit becomes a pattern, and that pattern spreads into your entire life. I saw this clearly. People who mastered this small moment became more aware in everything else. They paused more, they reacted less, they chose better. Now listen carefully. This is where control becomes natural, not forced, not heavy, but steady. Now imagine this. You don't rush into situations. You don't get pulled into every emotion. You don't lose focus as easily. You move with clarity. That is the result. Now here's the truth. When awareness becomes part of you, distraction loses its power. When presence becomes natural, confusion cannot stay. Now listen carefully. This is the final shift. You are no longer trying to reset your state. You are already in control of it. Now imagine this. What once required effort now happens automatically. That's what makes it permanent. And once you reach this point, you don't go back easily, because this is no longer something you practice. It's who you've become. Now, this is where everything comes together. Because at this point, you might still be thinking, how can something so small make such a big difference? I remember this clearly. This was the exact question people asked, right before they fully understood it. Now, listen carefully. It's not about the words. It's not even about the moment before eating. It's about what that moment represents. Now imagine this. Your entire day is made up of actions, small ones, repeated ones, automatic ones, and most of them happen without awareness. Now here's the truth you need to understand. You don't lose control in one big moment. You lose it in hundreds of small, unconscious ones. I saw this again and again. People were not stuck because of something dramatic. They were stuck because they never interrupted the pattern. Now listen carefully. This one habit works because it introduces awareness into something you do every day, not once, but multiple times. Now imagine this. Instead of living your entire day on autopilot, you begin to insert moments of control, moments where you pause, moments where you reset, moments where you choose. That changes everything. Now, here's something very important. Big change does not come from big actions, it comes from repeated awareness. I saw this clearly. People who mastered small moments started changing bigger ones naturally, not by force, but by extension. Now listen carefully. This is why most people stay stuck. They wait for a big change and ignore the small ones. Now imagine this. You don't wait anymore. You use what is already in your day. You turn ordinary moments into reset points. That creates consistency. Now here's the truth. Consistency builds control, and control creates direction. Now listen carefully. This is the final understanding. You don't need something complicated. You don't need something extreme. You need something repeatable. Now imagine this. Every single day, multiple times a day, you return to awareness. You reset your state. You move forward with clarity. That repetition becomes your foundation. Now, here's the truth: when your foundation changes, everything built on top of it changes too. Now, listen carefully. This is not about doing more, it's about being more aware in what you already do. And once that becomes part of you, you don't lose it easily because it's no longer something you practice, it's how you live. And that's what makes something this small change everything. Now, this is the part that determines everything, not what you heard, but what you do next. I remember this clearly. People would understand everything, they would agree, they would even feel motivated, but then they did nothing. And because of that, nothing changed. Now listen carefully. Information does not create change. Understanding does not create change. Even awareness alone does not create change. Only one thing does: decision. Now imagine this. You've seen the pattern, you understand the moment, you know exactly what to do. But then you say, I'll start later, I'll try it tomorrow, I'll remember when I can. And just like that, it disappears. Now here's the truth you need to understand: delay keeps you exactly where you are. I saw this again and again. People didn't fail because it was difficult. They failed because they postponed it. Now listen carefully. This is not something you prepare for. It's something you begin immediately. Now imagine this. Your next meal comes, and instead of doing what you've always done, you pause right there. No waiting, no overthinking. You apply it. That moment is the decision. Now, here's something very important: a decision is not a thought, it's not a plan, it's an action. I saw this clearly. People who acted immediately built the habit faster, not because they were more disciplined, but because they didn't give themselves time to fall back. Now listen carefully. This is where everything changes. You stop waiting for the perfect moment and use the moment you already have. Now imagine this. Every time you eat, you follow through. You don't skip it, you don't rush it, you stay consistent. That repetition builds identity. Now here's the truth: you don't become consistent by thinking about it, you become consistent by doing it. Now listen carefully. This is the final step. You decide that this small moment matters, not sometimes, but every time. Now imagine this: days pass, and you don't miss it. Weeks pass, and it becomes natural. Months pass, and it becomes part of you. That's how change becomes permanent. Now here's the truth: everything you've heard means nothing until you act on it. So the real question is not, does this work? The real question is, will you actually do it? Because if you do, something small will begin to change something big. And that change will not come from effort alone, but from consistency. And once that consistency builds, you won't go back to the way you were before, because you didn't just learn something, you became something different.